Rogue One, a Star Wars story. Of all the Star Wars movies, this was the one I was looking forward to getting on 3D Blu-ray the most, since I got my 3D TV. Now, I did go to see this in theater, but something came up while I was watching it, and I had to leave for a bit. So I ended up missing about a half hour of this movie. Well, look at that great hat shot. Despite missing that part of the movie, I found I still did enjoy it the most out of all the Star Wars movies. I think it had something to do with this being very focused. It had a very specific end goal. It was a war movie, and it was very straightforward that it was about survival and getting the thing away from the Empire. It was never confusing in the least, and at any given moment of the movie, it was always about the same thing. And that singular vision also meant, however, that the main character was a bit incidental to the whole story. Indeed, all the characters are just sort of along for the ride. We learn just enough about them to, feel bad for them when they get into trouble later on. Now, the whole thing revolves around the big Death Star, the allegory for the nuclear bomb, which looks terribly flat in this movie. And really, what a mixed 3D bag this movie is. And some of that has to do with using a very narrow range of focus. Here, see the barrel sticking out, but it's blurry. And the background also is out of focus. So your eye overlooks all that depth. They're constantly using that narrow focus to direct your attention, and so foregrounds and backgrounds are going in and out of focus, and it all looks very good, very cinematic, but just doesn't do well in 3D. And I am amazed that they handle the blurriness very well in 3D, and it does blend in very well. But you see the tip of this arrow, and again at the blurry background. So you're instinctively focused on his face, which is what that technique is supposed to do, but it's at the expense of any good 3D moment. And they do it all the time, so you never really get any enjoyable poke-out effects, even if the 3D information is there. Now, what's even more bizarre is the CGI shots are consistently shallow. Some of the shots are nearly flat, and they are the most heartbreaking moments. And what I mean is that they're what I showed up to see, what I was really hoping would pop right out and slap me in the face, and they just don't, ever. Sometimes you'll get some ships that have a little bit of space, but the backgrounds are largely flat. And bizarrely, when you cut to the cockpits or inside the ships, you get plenty of depth. It seems if there's a person in the shot, you'll get some depth. But anything CGI heavy has very little, like these lasers against a flat background. And again, we'll cut to some amazing 3D inside. This scene in this tunnel is probably one of the best 3D moments in all 5 Star Wars movies. The walls are rich in little details, and they give your eye plenty to reference distance with, which translates to a very nice sense of height. Just a beautiful 3D moment. And again, whenever people are on screen, there seems to be some good 3D. But when it goes to being animated, it all goes flat. This scene in particular is so heartbreaking. And in the end, it cuts between these great 3D shots against these flat CGI shots. And I was actually getting a little bit irritated with the inconsistency, more so with the flat moments, but altogether it was a bizarre experience. Now, this movie attempts to explain how it is that the Death Star was so vulnerable in the original movie. Myself, I always found that to be the most believable thing in all of Star Wars, was that the government would spend trillions creating a faulty space station. Entities that are essentially infallible tend not to have great track records. Now, complexity is not really a sign of strength, is it? It's the weak who have to consider how to conquer the strong. And for some reason, this reminds me of the old theory that Earth was the center of the universe. I never thought much of it, just assumed maybe people were dumb or less thinking back then. But actually, it's quite the opposite. A lot of work went into that theory, and it was around for over 1,000 years for a reason. Its core might have been wrong, but they built a complexity around it that actually worked. They could predict where the stars would be at a certain time, and if I can predict the outcome, well, it must be true. And here in Rogue One, it's kind of the same deal. It's kind of like a vulnerable core surrounded by a complex iron shell that gave the impression of strength. And kind of like Vader himself, isn't it?